This is a new year and the start of a new chapter for the Pacific War. Around a year ago, we were still covering the start of the Japanese onslaught across the Pacific, as the Imperial forces continued their advance along the Malayan Peninsula, as they kept pursuing the retreating American Filipino troops in the Philippines, and as they prepared to embark on one of their most complex campaigns yet, the invasion of the Dutch East Indies. Today, the picture is much more different, however, due to the fact that the Japanese have been thrown onto the defensive, both in the Solomons and in New Guinea. With plans already underway to evacuate Guadalcanal, and with the recent fall of Buna, as we saw last week, the horizon looks grim for the Empire of Japan. In this episode, we'll continue with our coverage of the Battle of Buna-Gona as it enters its last phase, the Sanananda Campaign, and we'll also head to the CBI Theatre to see some new developments on the Yunnan border. Hey history fans, quick channel update before we jump to the video. As we've said previously, most of the money earned by this channel is being reinvested into more better researched and better made videos, as well as our Wizards and Warriors and Cold War channels. We prefer to rely on our kind patrons and YouTube members, and not sponsors. No one likes excessive sponsorships. However, right now having sponsors is a necessity. Still, we vow that as soon as we get to 10,000 patrons and YouTube members, we'll stop adding sponsorships to our videos. We have a great team and we want to be able to continue paying them living or competitive wages and not cut back on production. So until the algorithm is more favourable and we can release more than 3 videos per week, extra videos that our team has created will be posted as YouTube member and Patreon exclusives. 1 or 2 videos per week will be exclusively available for our YouTube members and patrons, whose ranks you can join by pressing the button below the video or becoming a patron via the link in the description. Don't worry though, these videos will not be from one of the ongoing series and will be either standalone episodes or belong to a new series. For just $5 you can support our work, watch exclusive videos, there are 10 now and more are added every week, get early access to free videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind the scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and for your kind support. We wouldn't be able to do what we love without you. As we last saw on the Sanananda front, by mid-December, the American forces of the 126th Regiment had successfully established the Huggins roadblock, subsequently defending their gained perimeter as the Australian 30th Brigade drained out its strength trying to relieve Lieutenant Del Ponte's exhausted men. Assessing the situation, Generals Herring and Vesey knew that they needed to reinforce their depleted forces on this front. With the 18th Brigade assigned to reinforce Warren Force, the Australians knew that they couldn't leave Milner Bay undefended, so the 17th Brigade was out of the question. Only 2 units thus remained in Port Moresby, the Militia 36th Battalion and the 2nd 7th Cavalry Regiment, which had undertaken training as infantry in the last months. By December 15th, as these 2 fresh units began to assemble at Saputa, Brigadier Porter counted with 527 men from his 30th Brigade, 119 soldiers from the 2nd 3rd Battalion, and 555 Americans from the 126th Regiment. The last 2, because of sickness, exhaustion, and reluctance to attack, could only be used in a positional role. In that regard, a policy of patrolling and infiltrating the entrenched Japanese positions had been adopted, instead of launching another costly frontal assault. But if the state of the Allied forces was dire, especially that of Huggins's force, it was nothing compared with that of the Japanese they had cut off. Colonel Tsukamoto's men had been in their positions since November 21st without reinforcements or reliable supplies. They were short of food, weapons, and ammunition, dependent on a trickle that came down the Killerton track from time to time. Under continual rain by night and scorching sun by day, they were again close to starvation and were ravaged by malaria and diarrhea in a breeding ground created by their own encirclement. Against this background, Vasily planned to renew his offensive by December 19th with his newly arrived cavalry and the remnants of the 30th Brigade. Skirting the most forward Japanese positions and starting from Huggins's roadblock, The 2nd 7th Cavalry was to quickly push along the track and seize the beach area, while Porter's men were to eliminate all the Japanese then remaining in the area from Garua to Garara. On December 16th, the 1st Squadron of the 2nd 7th Cavalry set out along the pathway which came in from the west to cut the Killerton track, and then passed on to join the Sanananda track at Huggins's roadblock. This was the same pathway that had been used to supply the roadblock, and although they had to fight their way through a dangerous kunai area in the vicinity of the Killerton track, the regiment would safely arrive at the roadblock by December 18th, after crossing several swamps, some chest deep, and after passing through the rotting casualties of previous encounters. In the morning of December 19th, Porter's renewed offensive then began as mortar and artillery fire started to fall on the Japanese positions. A few minutes later, his 2 battalions began their closing movement towards the Sanananda track. Although the 49th Battalion made considerable progress on the right and successfully overran 2 or 3 enemy machine gun positions, the 55th 53rd came against a strongly held area from which 2 machine guns and stubborn riflemen refused to be dislodged. Suffering huge casualties, the composite battalion would fail to overcome the enemy in front, and in the confusion, the attack would have to be called off. Yet the 49th still continued forward, reinforced by a company of the 36th Battalion, and finally got to contact Huggins's roadblock. In the meantime, the 2nd 7th Cavalry had set out along the track with the objective of reaching Sanananda Point at all costs. Dazed after the long night and the savage bombardment, the Japanese allowed the Australian squadrons to advance for about 450 yards without hindrance, until the cavalrymen found themselves facing Colonel Yokoyama's main positions in the central sector. Now thoroughly alert, such a strong and devastating rain of fire fell upon the Australians that the 1st Squadron of the 2nd 7th Cavalry was almost completely annihilated. Instead of launching another frontal assault against these positions, the B Squadron of Captain John James was directed to make a left-flanking sweep, while D Squadron executed the same maneuver to the right. Yet the Marese unit offered strong resistance against this outflanking attempt, so James would only be able to establish a defensive perimeter some 400 yards forward of the Huggins's roadblock. This new tenuous position, with men from the Marese unit still occupying the track between it and Huggins's roadblock, was manned by some 100 men and would be known as the Kano roadblock. Despite the relative success of Captain James, the remaining squadrons of the 2nd 7th Cavalry would have to retreat by nightfall, thus concluding the attack. The following day, Porter ordered the rest of the 36th to join the 49th Battalion in their offensive, yet the inexperienced militiamen would fail to make much progress during the night, suffering many losses against Tsukamoto's forces. Meanwhile, James had been settling his men more firmly within their defences and laying out ground strips to guide the aircraft, which he hoped might bring him ammunition, batteries for his wireless, and food. Vigorous patrolling from both Huggins's and James's roadblocks in the next few days also added much to the Australians' knowledge of the Japanese dispositions. On December 22nd, the Australians thankfully saw some reinforcements arrive, as Brigadier Doherty came over from the Gona area with his 39th Battalion to take command of the Huggins's roadblock area and forward, including the positions held by the 49th Battalion and the 2nd 7th Cavalry. Upon arriving at Huggins, the 39th relieved the battered and exhausted Americans there, yet the men of the 39th were also weary, so Doherty was not to launch any offensive operations. Instead, his mission was to maintain the 2 roadblocks, build up reserves of ammunition and rations, and patrol aggressively. Early on December 23rd, however, D Squadron again departed Huggins's roadblock to establish a line of communication with the Kano roadblock. Swinging wide to the right and moving slowly to avoid detection, the Australians would successfully arrive at James's position by December 24th, and would also establish 2 firm bases across the way for patrols to keep sweeping the line which was being opened. Due to this success, it was determined that the entire 2nd 7th Cavalry Regiment would move to the Kano roadblock, immediately starting to improve and fortify this tenuous position. Meanwhile, Porter saw himself in a similar situation to that of Doherty. so he could achieve little more than active patrolling during what remained of the year. Generals Vassy and Herring agreed that further major offensive action on this front was impossible without tanks and fresh infantry, and these had all been deployed on the Buna front. The well-trained American 163rd Regiment was also earmarked to reinforce the Sanananda front, but it would take some time for their arrival. Thus, the Australians could only wait for now. During this time though, the starving Japanese would become much more aggressive, launching raiding and scavenging parties to get food and ammunition. The most important engagement of this sort happened on the night of December 28th, when a raiding party fell upon the gun positions, exploded a charge in the barrel of one gun and destroyed it. Hence the forward gunners could never feel safe. With the fall of Buna on January 2nd, 1943, however, the forces on this front were finally freed to reinforce Sanananda. Herring then decided that he would form two main forces against Sanananda: Vassy's 7th Division, with the 14th, 18th and 30th Brigades, the tanks of the 2nd 6th Armoured Regiment, and the American 163rd Regiment, which arrived on the night of January 2nd, and General Eichelberger's Buna Force, with the 3 regiments of the 32nd Division. The task of the 7th Division would be to capture the Sanananda Point Cape Killerton position and contain the Japanese in the Amboga River-Mambare River area, while Buna Force was to defend the Cape Ndiaye-Buna area from seaborne attack and advance up the coast against the Sanananda defences by way of Tarakena. Yet we'll also recall that Tarakena had fallen to the forces of Colonel Yazawa on January 4th, so Colonel Groves immediately decided to send the 3 companies of the 127th Regiment to retake this vital position. These would cross Siwari Creek the following day, slowly approaching their objective while the Japanese executed delaying actions. By nightfall on January 8th, the 127th had reached Tarakena, holding their enemies at bay at the village. 2 fresh companies then came through these tired men and finally reduced the village before the night was far advanced. Yet strong Japanese positions would then successfully stop the American advance at Konombi Creek until January 10th, when a bridgehead was at last established. But this well-earned success quickly turned sour, as they discovered that the terrain ahead was impassable, with the ocean and swamps merging at high tide, so it seemed the American advance would have to be paused for the time being. Meanwhile, Vassy had deployed the 163rd Regiment of Colonel Jens Doe in the positions in and around the 2 roadblocks, preparing the Americans to launch a renewed offensive to reduce Colonel Tsukamoto's forces on the southwest sector. To support them, the 18th Brigade would also relieve the depleted 30th Brigade and 126th Regiment, with the 2nd 7th Cavalry becoming a part of Brigadier Wooten's forces. On December 8th, action finally resumed as Colonel Doe proposed to overcome the main Japanese positions between the 2 roadblocks. After a heavy bombardment of the 2 defensive perimeters of the Marese unit, the 1st Battalion 163rd Regiment launched its assault, but was easily repulsed by the battle-hardened defenders. The next day, after this failure, it was the turn of the 2nd Battalion, under the command of Major Walter Rankin, which was to strike across country towards the Killerton track as per Vassy's main plan. Rankin's advance would be swift and face little opposition, so by the end of the day, his battalion was sighted across the track in close contact with the enemy positions to the south, in a position that was to be known as the Rankin Roadblock. New and important events would then unfold in the following days, but we'll have to cover them in the future. For now, we have to move to the CBI Theatre, where a new offensive threatened the Chinese position on the Yunnan border. We have to recall that during the year of 1942, the Kingdom of Thailand, that was ruled by Marshal and Prime Minister Phibun Songkhram, had aided the Japanese Empire during the conquests of Malaya and Burma, and thus had gained control over some territories to the south, as well as the Shan states. In the latter, the Thai army had aggressively engaged the retreating Chinese forces, while at the same time issuing racist policies against the Chinese inhabitants in their own territory. By the end of the year, Phibun was now preparing to invade the province of Yunnan, because a small Thai minority populated its southwestern border, which he considered a part of his deemed Greater Thailand. Thus, a total of 30,000 soldiers of the Phayap army had concentrated in the Shan states by late December, with Lieutenant General Charin Ratanakan Seriringrit initially planning to cross the Nam Loi River and secure the Nan Lan River Valley. As a preliminary, the 4th Division's 9th Regiment would set out from Kentang and advance to Mongwa, capturing the town by late December. From there, a combined force under Major General Luang Han Songkram was to capture the towns of Mongma and Mongla to secure the border with Yunnan. On January 7, 1943, the Thai offensive finally started as the Nam Loi River was crossed. Yet their attack wouldn't be easy, as the entrenched defenders bravely resisted the incessant attacks of the invaders for 3 days straight, until such relentless pressure forced the Chinese to retreat on January 11th. Simultaneously, the Royal Thai Air Force, now boasting some Ki-27s and Ki-30s bought from the Japanese, severely pummeled the Kuomintang positions on their rear. Air attacks such as the incursion on the Chengbung base of January 12th would take the life of numerous Chinese soldiers and would cause much harm to their logistics. The air superiority also allowed the invaders to quickly advance through the jungles, rapidly overrunning a vast number of enemy garrisons. On the morning of January 13th, the 3rd and 13th Regiments then crossed the Nan Lan River at Mongla and advanced in the direction of Qianlong, where they would finally be stopped 10 days later by a strong Chinese fortification. There, the Thai soldiers would launch several assaults against the entrenched Chinese defenders, yet they would all end in the same result: massive loss of life for the invaders. This was because the Chinese had set up machine gun positions in the adjacent hills, thus devastating the Thai forces with their crossing fire and finally forcing them to retreat. But this wasn't the end of their struggle, as numerous air attacks by Ki-30s would then unfold to destroy the Chinese fortifications, culminating with a bomb explosion on a powder keg that caused a tremendous explosion that left the area covered with a dense pall of smoke. The Chinese defenders were stunned by this attack, so the Thai forces would quickly take advantage of this favourable event to storm Qianlong, finally taking the fort on January 28th. Yet Thai casualties had been very high, and thus the invaders would be unable to proceed with the invasion. Furthermore, the Thais were seeing the recent Japanese defeats as a bad omen for the future, so they wanted to increase their relations with China and the Allies by withdrawing from Yunnan. By January 29th, the offensive was finally brought to a halt, and a sort of static trench warfare would develop over the next 2 years in this immense line of defensive posts and fortifications, in which both sides would suffer many more casualties. But that is all for this week. Next week we'll return to Guadalcanal to cover the continuation of General Patch's major offensive on the Mount Austin area, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.